So hello everyone and welcome to this fifth eMag on climate action in Africa. Today we're going to be talking about sustainable mobility and transports. I am María Lucini. I work for the events department here at Climate Chance. And for those of you who do not know us, Climate Chance is an international organization that was founded in 2015 that aims to bring together all the non-state actors recognized by the UN. So for that, we have the 9 group of actors that you all know very well: local authorities, business and industry, most of the participants that are here today, NGOs. And our 3 main missions are sharing information, which we do through our action portal. I think you'll be able to find the link on the chat. We also analyze climate action through our Observatory. And thirdly, and most importantly, we bring together climate and biodiversity actors through events like this that have the intent of federating all these actors. And these eMags, which are monthly sessions to talk about climate action in Africa, will take place until next month. So next month will be the last one for the year. And for more practical information, it is a very common question that you all ask. We will be publishing the replay on YouTube. This is being recorded, and we will also publish an online magazine on our website that will be shared with you as well. So you will have all the information after the event. And for our session today, we have quite a few speakers. Among them, as always, we have Mélaine Assè-Wassa, works in the Observatory of Climate Change. He's our project officer for climate action in Africa. And he is going to be presenting to do an introduction on the collaboration between the Africa and the Laboratoire Mobilités Transport for this eMag, because as you know, we publish an analysis note and we've had a lot of help for this issue. And you will be able to find the full note on our website. We will also send the link through the chat. And so to present the note, we're going to have Yao Tsoekeo, who is a researcher for the Laboratoire Mobilités Transport de l'Ecole de ponts ParisTech, who will present the analysis note titled "Should Africa Move Towards Electric Mobilities?" It's going to be very interesting. And as always, we're going to have our partners from Afrik for this eMag. We have Benoit-Ivan Wansi, journalist at Afrik. He's going to analyze some news articles, notably on access to finance for these electric mobility initiatives. And he's going to be focused on urban mobility. And afterwards, we're going to have a wonderful panel to discuss about whether or not electromobilities are adapted to African context, and also how can they be made more accessible and more inclusive. And for that, we're going to have Shantha Bloemen, Managing Director of Mobility for Africa, whose project takes into account a very necessary gender perspective. So she will talk about how electric mobility can empower women, especially in rural areas. And then we're going to have Shaukatali Hussein, who is the founder of a Tanzania Open Innovation Organization, who is developing a project under the umbrella of La Fabrique de Mobilités. And he's going to explain his very interesting as well, humanitarian innovation in the context of inclusive e-mobility. And then we're also going to have Dominique Breuil, who is the board member at CODATU, and who will moderate the discussion panel. So now that you have all the important information, I think we can start now with Mélaine's introduction. Hello, Mélaine.
Bonjour, Maria. Bonjour.
Yes, hello, Maria. Hello, everyone, and welcome. I'm Mélaine Assè-Wassa. I'm in charge of the climate action for Africa and also the officer for the Observatory. As we've been doing now for a few months, we are producing analysis notes for climate change, and we present those during the eMags. For this particular one, we are looking at e-mobility. Before that, for this particular eMag, we have also collaborated with Dr. Yao Tsoekeo, who is in charge, who is a researcher at the Laboratoire for Villes, Mobilités, Transport at the Ecole des Ponts in Paris. And we will have his input through his notes that he will present in a few minutes, just to give you an idea of that context for this particular issue of e-mobility. During the previous assessment of our observatory, we noticed a trend towards e-mobility or electric mobility on the African continent, and we observed this trend within the African context, which is already facing many challenges. We've talked about this in the eMag, the energy crisis. We have a gap in the energy access and access to electricity for all, but there are also other challenges which would require the transition to the e-mobility. So we raise the question of the necessity or the opportunity for the African continent to actually move towards the e-mobility. But in order to talk about this, I'm going to give the floor now to Dr. Yao to give us his insight through this relevant note, which I would encourage you to take a look at if you haven't done so already. Thank you. Yes, thank you, Mélaine. Hello, everyone. Thank you for inviting me to this webinar, so interesting, to talk about the role and the place of electric vehicles in Africa. Just to introduce myself, I'm working for the Laboratoire Villes, Mobilités, Transport, and I'm interested in the place or the role of the electric mobility in Africa and all the various initiatives in that respect. And I'm doing this with my colleague, Virginie Boutet. She's not here with us today. But coming back to my communication with 3 parts in my presentation, I will talk of some influential elements and the various trends that we have been observing. Then I will talk about a few challenges regarding the transition to e-mobility on the African continent. And then I will end with the various levers which are necessary in order to make that transition. So the transition towards e-mobility in Africa seems impossible or complicated for many people with regards to everything that we know about Africa and the transport area in particular. And there is a strong dependency on second-hand cars, also the income per habitant, the GDP, and the cost of e-vehicles, and the issues of electricity access and the reliabilities and high carbon electricity mixed. But beside those drawbacks or handicaps, we have identified a number of levers which are present on the continent, namely the great potential for renewable energies, which is not yet fully exploited, the off-grid system and the low cost of the kilowatts, the cost of electricity, which could be less expensive than the cost of fossil energy, at least in some countries in the continent, and also the favorable TCO and innovative business models, or the VEH inputs of the EV incentive promoting second-hand vehicles and the promoting of electric vehicles. So as we look at these various elements and indicators, many stakeholders over the last few years have proposed different e-mobility solutions. Around the years 2000, 2008, mainly during the Paris car show. So the expansion of e-mobility in Africa became really effective over the last 5 years beside the slowdown that we have observed. So these projects are not evenly distributed across the continent, as you can see on this map to the right-hand side. A sub-regional look at this shows that it's mainly East Africa who is the leader, which is a leader. Kenya, for example, Uganda, Rwanda, Tanzania are the key countries. But besides these main countries, we are seeing also this trend pretty much everywhere in Africa in order to help the continent to meet some of those sustainable challenges, environmental challenges due to the air pollution. Recent studies have shown that there is a potential for mitigating through the e-mobility, especially through the carbon footprint of e-vehicles, as opposed to fossil energy, which is highly carbonated. So the transition towards e-mobility could really save money and save carbon, also reduce carbon emissions related to transportation. This potential is of course more important here. This is what the other chart to the right is showing, with going actually above the line. So at a more local scale, the gas emissions due to electric, or the lower emissions due to electric vehicles, could help African cities to reduce the level of air pollution and to also decrease the number of deaths directly connected to pollution, which is in the second position of the cause of death on the continent, behind HIV. Finally, from an economic point of view, e-mobility, and this is more of a personal view here, for Africa would also bring an industrial bonus. This is only representing at the moment 2% of the global manufacturing figures. So this transition to e-mobility would really lead to a momentum for the manufacturing and the services, local services. Shantha and the other speaker will talk about this initiative after my presentation. So even though this project is focusing mainly on the manufacturing or the assembling and doesn't seem to be as important, it's still very important. It will really lead to a turning point in the car industry globally, with the valorization of the made in Africa manufacturing. Moving to electric mobility would enable a number of countries on the continent to be freed from the fossil fuel subsidies, and which compromise the development processes. However, in order to fully enjoy this transition to e-mobility in Africa, what are the drivers in order to face the various challenges of the transition? One of the drivers, of course, is the support to R&D, the R&D funding, to make an analysis between the contribution and the rise of research in Africa. Several issues are still pending, and this topic has not been fully grasped yet in many of the universities on the continent. So for me, I think it is a lack of universities. We need to fully upscale and to make up for the lack of knowledge, and this should be offset by new projects in order to show the best way forward for Africa in order to optimize the transition towards e-mobility. So that's pretty much in a nutshell what I wanted to share today. And this is the content of this note. And we can share about topics. Maybe this is raising some questions, but thank you. I will be available to answer any of those. Thank you. Thank you for presenting this note to us.
To correct a little something that I said before, we have 2 eMags left, not 1. And yeah, if anyone has questions for Yao, please feel free to write them in the chat. I think he has to go. He cannot stay too late. So if you have questions, you can maybe ask them now if you wish. I think I haven't seen any particular question to you. If you want to add anything else, Yao.
Pardon?
Pardon, non, je pense qu'on n'a pas de questions.
I don't see any questions, so I don't know if you would like to add a last word, just say one more thing before we move on. Maybe come back quickly, maybe I could come back quickly on part of the note which I was not able to detail as much, especially regarding the light vehicles long-term in this transition to e-mobility in Africa. So I looked at what was best and what was more successful on the continent and what could be done in the short term and long term in terms of electrification. And as far as I'm concerned, this is simply my own view on this. I think the two-wheelers are probably ahead of all the other segments. These are vehicles which dominate the the market in Africa. These vehicles are often used for the transportation of people with a very fast return on investment within 3 or 4 years. These vehicles do not cause many difficulties in terms of technology. What we're seeing mainly in African cities, we are seeing swapping stations in order to solve the issue of charging the vehicles compared to buses, which require much more technology for recharging. Besides two-wheelers, we also have tricycles, tuk-tuk, which also have the same potential. It would be a lot easier to deploy those types of vehicles on the continent. And the third position, according to my own analysis, again, this is my own view, it's not then you have the minibuses, and there are charging under development with various stakeholders. I'm following their manufacturing with a particular project, and I've been doing so for the last 2 years. So they're really making good headways. There are still areas to be solved, and in order to plan the deployment of the minibuses in the future. So far, the results from the R&D research have shown the great potential to be exploited. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you for those added points. Now, we will now have the next speaker with Afrik 21 and Benoit-Ivan, who is going to give us some updates about some recent articles, especially regarding the funding for e-mobility in Africa. Thank you. You have the floor, Benoit. Hello, everyone. Thank you, Maria, Thank you for giving me the floor and inviting me to talk about the main highlights of the news in this sector and what caught our attention regarding e-mobility in Africa. I want to thank Chloe, first of all, for her availability. So thank you, everyone. So regarding sustainable development in Africa, biodiversity, waste management, etc., and co-building, co-constructions, smart cities, and of course, e-mobility. So over the last few weeks, the update of the latest news was quite dense over the last few weeks. Either we had the exclusivity or we got first-hand information. So we've seen a few solutions, digital solutions, and we've heard of headways in the funding of this sector. First of all, let's talk about startup mobility, funded in 21. This is a city close to the Sahara desert. So in this particular region, there is also solar energy, transportation of medical teams. So this initiative was co-funded by an agency of cooperation at a time when the authorities were looking at reducing by 46% the gas emissions. So this is for Tunisia. In Morocco, this is also developing and there are many initiatives, such as in Tunisia. One particular agency said they would develop the solar energies to develop e-mobility in Moroccan cities. This is part of a partnership with Vivo Energy Morocco, which is selling all the various fuels, with Shell as well. So you must know that this country, Morocco, has a great electricity mix with renewable energy. So this energy transition has given way to the creation of an organization for e-mobility in Morocco. Another information concerning transportation in East Africa. We have heard this is the most dynamic region on the continent. Kenya mainly has become the African capital for e-mobility, with many assembly startup companies. Dr. Yao mentioned this. Among those startups, Basingo, which is really at the lead, but other companies as well, Inspiro, Moto Electric Mobility before, that was the name, they've changed. And they are now on the market for e-vehicles, and they are commissioning now some electric motorbikes for the next month. So this investment would help to release some of the transportation issues with an investment of $200 million. In the meantime, this fleet we still have many ICE vehicles that are polluting in this city. So this project is going to create about 9,000 jobs in Uganda. So this company I'm talking about, this is Togolese in the origin. This person left Togo, their country, to export electric vehicles. So this measure should be implemented in the second part of the year. And this will expand to other places in West Africa, in Senegal. Senegal is eagerly expecting its first electric bus in Dakar. With Mélaine, the French company, you can consult our website, Afrik 21. So there are different initiatives, and partners in development are starting to get interested in this, such as the Development Bank, to support e-mobility in those countries, such as Sierra Leone and others, which is no small thing.
Pardon, Benoit-Ivan, je pense que la traductrice elle a besoin de réduire.
Now, the interpreter has asked the speaker to speak a lot slower because this is going way too fast. I just can't keep up
La
with him.
traductrice, elle a
Thank you.
besoin de parler un peu plus doucement. C'est ça. Pardon.
It's not the interpreter, the speaker that has to speak slowly. Thank you. Not the interpreter. Sorry about this, says the speaker. Yes, please. So I was talking about funding up to $20 million from the Development Bank, a promise to many countries, Nigeria, among others, South Africa, Sierra Leone, which doesn't seem a lot, but still it's no small thing when we know that the demographic growth is rising and the state of some of those older equipment. So there will be an additional $136 million involved or engaged. This has been a promise from Germany, Denmark, UK. This is an additional funding to support e-mobility in Africa. So all in all, as you can see, funding is the core of the matter. So thank you, Maria. I want to end by saying a few words regarding the negotiations which are taking place at the moment between Japan and Mozambique. There will be a plant, a factory in order to manufacture batteries for e-vehicles. This is a province which has a lot of traffic, so experts know that this is a raw material that is pivotal for e-mobility. There are discussions at the moment between Mozambique and Japan, and this will be decisive for the transition to e-mobility. So this collaboration is also going to have a chain of value, and Zambia and Congo have committed to implement through a portfolio of $39 million. We've talked about this before. Till now, we haven't heard much more. This is a strategy. So the figure should increase. And I will conclude with this information. Thank you for your attention.
Merci beaucoup, Benoit-Ivan, pour cette description.
Thank you very much, Benoit-Ivan, for your input.
This is, well, so sorry for my French. This is why we have a very good translator. And now I will give directly the floor to Dominique Breuil for the panel discussion. Hello, Dominique.
Hello, Maria. Thank you very much. Well, I'm Dominique Breuil. I am a member of the board of CODATU in France, which deals with the improvement of mobility in general in the global South countries, and also on electric mobility. And for myself, I've been working in electromobility since more than 20 years now, working at the beginning in France with Peugeot and Renault and so on, with the first electric vehicles. So, well, that was very interesting speech from the two speakers before. So I'm to English. Yeah. Okay, so now we will turn to another part of this meeting, of this webinar, and we'll go more in detail in the social inclusion, in fact. We've gone technical first, and then now I think it's very important to see how this electromobility can have impacts on the society itself and how it will improve society. So, and I've seen also some questions. And maybe we will answer the question at the end because we have some time on the question. So it's nice that we put questions on the chat, and we try to answer this question after. So first, I will give the floor to Mrs. Bloemen, Shantha Bloemen, who will talk about the impacts on the improvement for to empower women in the rural areas. So, Mrs. Bloemen, the floor is yours.
Thank you, and apologies, my French has gotten very bad, so I will speak in English. So thank you. It's great to join such an interesting panel, and I think I concur with our first speaker that there's a great need to increase funding and research for research and development. We need African solutions, and we need to leverage a lot of technology that is being developed in other parts of the world, the richer world. So I set up Mobility for Africa as a pilot project in 2019 with a very simple premise that I wanted to address the last mile mobility crisis, as I call it, for rural populations, but especially for women. I think we've romanticized African women and just assumed that they're superheroes and can carry many things on their head and children on their back, and think that since they make it look easy, we assume that it's easy. But what we've learned is it's not. It has huge physical, social and economic costs. And when we started, there wasn't as much activity as there is now in e-mobility in Africa. We were very much an outlier, trying to prove that you could bring this type of technology to rural communities using an off-grid battery swapping system. It's been quite a journey, because we first had to prove that rural communities can afford these types of services. And what we tried to do was demonstrate that if you look in most rural areas, people spend money on transport and are willing to spend money on transport if it improves their livelihoods. And obviously the economic loss of not having transport, especially to their agricultural productivity, is very real. So we've been trying to argue that we should not think about the electric revolution as simply being about replacing combustible engines, but really rethinking transport in the continent by focusing on obviously shared transport solutions. And I think this is the exciting opportunity both for urban and rural parts of the continent, because we have a deficit of affordable, safe, efficient transport. So it's not just rural, but we know that that's where the problem is acute. In terms of we took a tricycle from China, different than the Indian Bajaj or tuk-tuk. We wanted something that was useful for rural activities. So the tricycle in China had been very useful for poorer communities in moving agricultural goods, getting to their fields, was slow and could be easily, a woman could easily learn how to drive it. And we were sort of lucky in Zimbabwe where we've been testing. There were no rules in place for tricycles. And we have been working with the government now to really push for not classifying this as a motorbike, because we have a huge challenge in the continent, which means that there's many barriers of entry for rural populations to get a license or to be able to drive. And that's particularly acute for rural women, because, if they need to get a motorbike license, they have to go to town, they have to be literate, there's cost implications. And then we also really had to adapt and learn about the technology, which essentially is batteries. And we learned by trial and error. So learning through, starting with the lead acid batteries that are commonly used in China, because this is servicing the poorest people, but quickly realizing that that wasn't going to work in your rural African areas where there's, non-existent electricity and very unreliable electricity if there is. So we now have designed, and we're continuing to improve a battery, a lithium phosphate battery that, we want to be fit for purpose. We want it to be durable and long lasting, and we want to now invest in the skill building, which I think is very exciting. To start at the teach a younger generation new skills about how electric mobility works, teach them the practicalities of battery maintenance and repair, and ultimately recycling. And in terms of the business modeling, and the de-risking is a word I've come to use, but trying to prove that agricultural rural communities can afford transport. We've been having women share the tricycle, so they rent it as a group and pay a monthly fee. We've set up our own Uber service with women driving the Humber, as we call it, for transport and logistics, and servicing the rural needs. So someone can work and call those women and say, I've got all my cabbages ready to harvest. Can you come and help pick them up and then take them to the market where the bus will take them to town, or someone needs to go to the doctor or to the health clinic, they can call. And then we've now been working with NGOs and the private sector to look at how we could introduce lease to purchase. We're focusing at the moment in the dairy sector, and the dairy is a daily crop. Women have to carry the milk every day. So obviously, if they can carry more than what they can put on their head, they can directly increase their income. So I think I'll pause, but I think in summary, I'm very, very excited by the potential of electric transport. I think there is a huge potential to unlock and solve a lot of problems, existing problems. I think it's going to require a lot more investment in the ecosystem. That means building training courses, skills, obviously making sure Africa doesn't miss out from its own natural resources, and it's all shipped off to Europe or Asia or the US, which I'm quite worried it will be. And really being very pragmatic and practical about how it can help the majority. So the design and investment, which is exciting in Nairobi, buses, combis, public transport, better transport. I think the challenge, and our first speaker showed the slide about the subsidies that still go into fossil fuels. the vested interests are very, we have the fossil fuel industry is still, developing, sites for exploitation and exploration in the continent. And I think I think a lot of the OEMs still think Africa will be the last bastion of combustible engines and hope to just sell secondhand cars to us in the continent. So I think we're going to have to really work and build alliances to fight some of these vested interests, because while there are startups like mine growing, we won't succeed if we don't have more momentum to build that ecosystem, which isn't just about whether the business model works, but how do we invest in the right systems to support. So I'll pause.
Thank you, Shantha, for this very interesting approach. And now I will give the floor to Mr. Shaukatali Hussein. Okay, the floor is yours.
Is that me? I'm sorry. Oh,
Yes,
sorry.
that's you.
The name is always difficult to pronounce. As usually people call me Ali. I think just to highlight what Shantha has been mentioning, I think it's very common to what we have been doing. The gender divide is quite big here in Tanzania, especially in the region of Tanga that we're working in, and adopting and adapting are two different things that people find difficult because this technology is still very new. Coming in a context where people know this is efficiently better. But at the same time, it's like showing someone a new AI tool and they're like, wow, like a movie. So this is kind of experience we've been getting so far. And I think one of the things we've been trying to mandate is not only to deploy the vehicles, but also to locally fabricate and hopefully manufacture. Initially, we had tried designing our own electric bicycle and then making our own battery packs now using lithium-ion cells. And we've actually come to a point now where we're actually trying to get cooperatives of youth between the age of 18 to 35 to adopt these trainings, which are obviously done for free at no cost, and all they have to do is attend the training to get the skills needed to actually start their own enterprise. In the long run, they are able to repair, maintain, and fix these electric vehicles. But not only are we looking at just for the general transportation, we try to adapt it to any sector of relevant necessity. For instance, it can be in agriculture, as mentioned by Shantha. We can even make electric mini tractors that can do farming or irrigation systems of that sort. Main thing is that this knowledge and skill is transferred accordingly so people can be sustainable and financially independent. And the way I see things are going when it comes to e-mobility in Africa in general, I think it's a growing and exploitable market, but has to be exploited the right way. And involve the people who are able to adopt and adapt these technologies, but also be involved in the building process. We're not people that are just sold the vehicles only. No, we want to be people who are even producing these things locally. And I think the future is going to be where now Africa becomes a potential powerhouse for these things. The next Wakanda is the buzzword we kind of used our people over here. And I think during my presentation, I will explain what we have done so far and how we're working with the local government to empower people with these skills and knowledge altogether.
Okay, sorry. So, well, very short. Okay, thank you very much for this.
Yeah.
Well, I have a question just for you at the beginning, because we have some time before the question to everybody. So if you have questions, just prepare them. And I have just a question to Mr. Shaukatali. What is, well, we have, in France, we have the Fabrique des Mobilités as well. Okay.
Yes.
So for me, what is the difference between your project and the French one?
Oh, there's not much of a difference, honestly. I think the Fab Mob have been our enablers to prove the cooperative project here in Tanga, because the idea was just to to understand the dynamics and the uptake of this project here in Tanzania, especially when it comes to work with semi-rural, semi-urban, semi-rural areas in Tanzania, keeping Tanga in some perspective. I think FabMob, giving a huge shout out to Gabriel, Malu, and the entire FabMob team for believing in us and giving us the opportunity to show that there is a growing and exponential demand for these things in Tanzania. And collaboratively, what we're trying to do basically is try to get people to be digitally and technically inclusive in this movement. Reason being is, as I mentioned, this is a region that hasn't been tapped before with high-end technology. And, be surprised on people's faces on how you can make a bicycle or a tricycle or a motorcycle or even a car into electric it's like magic, right? It's like a magic trick to people. But once they have been involved in the building process, I think they've fallen in love, and now you can see them creating these totally out of the box vehicles of different designs using the same skill and knowledge. And then I think that's what FabMob has really appreciated, that now there is a diverse mindset of trying to create tools in mobility that are actually needed in different areas. So a quick example is, we have normal wheelchairs that we've used from China, for instance, but those wheelchairs cannot be used in remote or rural areas because they're not adapted for that kind of environment. It's like either rough terrain or gravel, and those wheelchairs tend to not work properly and probably get damaged very quickly. So the idea was to make a more sturdier version of it that can be used in this rough terrain. And people have now made it into electric. People are making some recliner sofas into it to make it like a bed and a chair. And this is just from an inspiration of what FabMob has given us, and that's the opportunity. So we've taken that opportunity as a spark, and taken the spark to ignite this passion and interest in people to create something that belongs and is nurtured, is actually developed by themselves, for the people, by the people. That's our objective.
Thank you very much. So now we can launch the session about the questions. So if somebody has some questions, I will give them the floor. But in between, well, there are some questions on the chat, so I can answer maybe some of them, unless you have some questions. Somebody, some question?
Je pense qu'on peut prendre des questions, les questions du chat.
Je vais reprendre le français.
Il y a une question sur...
Okay, we'll switch back to French then. There is a question regarding batteries. Yes, I was going to come back to this, to recycling. So several questions regarding the recycling of batteries. Yes, indeed. There is a good question that is talking about the BRT batteries and the other kinds of batteries. And Shantha also talked about different types of batteries. It depends, of course, on the kind of battery that you have. There are several types with different components, different chemicals, etc., different types of batteries. But overall, as of today, what you need to know is that there are larger batteries and smaller ones. That's the first thing. BRT batteries are different to two-wheelers or motorbikes. And so for the recycling, the recycling processes at the end cycle, I'm talking about recycling in a battery. To be clear on this, a battery can have two cycles in its life. There is two periods of cycles. The first one on the vehicle, the second one can be used as the buffer storage. So a battery, in terms of life cycle, could be rather long, actually. As of today, manufacturers guarantee 7 to 8 years for larger batteries, for BRT, and a lot more for smaller batteries. This is guaranteed. Whereas we should be talking of cycles rather of years, the cycles of charge and discharge. It's a bit like when you put gas in your car. Some people consume more, others less. So you can fill your tank whenever you need it. It's a similar principle, if you like. We talk about cycles rather than years, actually. A cycle is charging and discharging. Now, coming back to the recycling, there are two phases. I'm talking about the larger batteries. You have the charging stations for strong power, what we call, in order to not interrupt or disturb the network, or this could be used for storage. This is the way that these batteries can be reused. And then there's the recycling phase. You have the real recycling and various recycling processes, which are well known and controlled. The main difficulty is that we don't have enough batteries to make it profitable at this stage. So we know the processes, or they will be fully operational in 7 or 8 years. So recycling is already taken care of and is not really an issue in order to recuperate the various elements of the battery. So I hope I was able to answer the questions. Indeed, this is an important topic, the life cycle of the batteries. But people who sell batteries have been talking about this for a long time, about 10, 12 years now that we've been talking about this, really. So it's nothing new as such. And there are a lot of people who've already talked and worked on the processes which already exist. Are there another question? I'm reading another question from the chat. Are there any? No, he did not read the question, so sorry I couldn't hear. But yes, these we can replace. I think this is a question. We can replace fossil or ICE engines by electric engines. There are companies which are specialized in this transition, in doing this, and that's very interesting, especially for minibuses. I'm talking here about Africa. It's mainly important or interesting for minibuses. There are a number of companies which are working on this. They have various conversion processes which are very profitable, actually. So the main benefit of this, we talk about reconversion for informal transportation. So this is a possible solution that is totally possible, which is less costly as well than buying a full electric bus. I'm reading as I'm talking, so sometimes Dr. Yao, please jump in if you want to add anything regarding the recycling. Yes, just a quick word about the recycling. Innovations are still underway. For example, there's a partnership between Valeo and those who are trying to produce or manufacture electric vehicles without batteries. So there are many more things to come. I'm talking about batteries without Terra, not without batteries. Otherwise, it would no longer be an electric vehicle. So the issue of batteries, it's not just so much the end cycle, but also the actual manufacturing of the battery, which is creating a lot of tension on the terrace. You may remember the last two maps which I presented earlier on, which showed a mapping of the project, but also a distribution of a scientific documentation. We see, for example, the Congo, the Democratic Republic of Congo, but for a number of projects, it is really relaying a message which is of great interest for many vehicle manufacturers, because that's where cobalt, for example, is very much present in the Congo, and that's what is of great. Yeah, don't talk too much about cobalt. I didn't get you. Sorry. Go ahead. So there is pressure on the resources and also on the manufacturing, and there are partnerships between Valeo and Renault. That's what I wanted to say. The interpreter has to leave this meeting, so I apologize for stopping my interpretation service at this point. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
L'hydrogène ne supprime pas les batteries, c'est clair, mais les diminue fortement. En fait, ce sont des véhicules hybrides. Or, les technologies hydrogène pour les gros véhicules, voire pour les trains, puisque ça existe aujourd'hui, c'est pas rentable aujourd'hui totalement, mais les technologies hydrogène qui, on ose espérer, dans 20-25 ans, seront accessibles, vont complètement changer la donne du véhicule électrique, puisque du coup, on se posera beaucoup moins le problème des batteries et le problème des terres rares et autres matériaux et de la fabrication des batteries, puisque on se servira d'autres éléments, sachant en plus que au niveau africain, la production d'hydrogène est relativement plus facile. Je dirais bien pourquoi? Parce qu'on peut la produire à partir d'énergie renouvelable, et il y a un certain nombre de pays qui sont déjà lancés largement sur ces sujets-là. Donc l'avenir est, comme disait Yao, l'avenir est plein de questions auxquelles on ne sait pas répondre aujourd'hui, c'est sûr, mais qui montrent qu'il y aura des évolutions. D'ici 20-25 ans, on aura de fortes évolutions dans ce domaine.
Merci beaucoup. Je ne sais pas si quelqu'un peut réagir. Sinon, on a plusieurs questions encore, dont une sur la mobilité douce, la prise en compte de la mobilité douce parmi toutes ces infrastructures de transport. Si quelqu'un parmi les intervenants...
Si vous voulez bien, je peux répondre un tout petit peu, à moins que quelqu'un d'autre veuille y répondre, mais la mobilité électrique n'est pas une solution toute seule, hein, c'est clair. Donc, il est nécessaire, en fait, deux choses. C'est un mode c'est une motorisation qui vient en complément d'autres motorisations et d'autres moyens de transport et d'autres moyens de mobilité. D'accord? En plus, quand on parle de mobilité douce, on inclut bien sûr les vélos, les trottinettes, etc., qui sont pour beaucoup électriques aujourd'hui. Donc, à part la marche active, voilà. Donc, en fait, quand on parle de mobilité électrique, c'est juste un élément dans un système de transport global. Okay. Quelqu'un a parlé dans les questions, surtout à Kinshasa, je crois, une des premières questions était sur Kinshasa, comment intégrer, qu'est-ce qui se passe à ce niveau-là? Et en fait, il est clair que lorsque l'on veut développer de la mobilité électrique, ça rentre dans une stratégie globale de mobilité à l'échelon d'une ville, voire à l'échelon d'un pays, puisqu'il y a certains aspects qui ne peuvent être que nationaux. Donc, l'idée, c'est que la mobilité douce, au contraire, je dirais, peut être encouragée en parallèle avec l'utilisation de modes de transport à motorisation électrique.
Merci. On avait aussi une question pour Benoit-Ivan dans le chat sur la loi sur la mobilité qui a été adoptée au Togo. Je ne sais pas si vous avez des détails à apporter là-dessus.
Ouais, je vais rapidement dire un mot à propos. C'est une bonne question parce que justement, le Togo fait partie de ces pays d'Afrique de l'Ouest qui essayent comme ça d'accélérer un peu l'électrification de son système de transport. Et parmi les mesures qui ont été prises au cours des dernières années, notamment en 2022, l'année dernière, il y a donc cette mesure visant à exonérer, à dispenser les véhicules électriques du paiement des droits de douane au niveau de l'importation. Donc, concrètement, tout engin de transport dans ce pays-là n'ayant pas recours au diesel ou à l'essence peut bénéficier d'un agrément de l'État pour entrer de manière légale et sereine dans le pays. Alors, comment ça se passe? L'agrément est délivré conjointement par les ministères de l'Environnement et du Commerce en collaboration avec l'Office togolais des recettes, abrégé OTR. Le décret en question a été signé par le président. Il est implémenté par la Première ministre. Donc, en gros, c'est une mesure parmi tant d'autres qui vise justement à faciliter, à favoriser l'exportation des véhicules électriques dans ce pays. Il y a également le Kenya qui a suivi le mouvement en annonçant il y a 3 semaines, un mois déjà, je crois, qu'une mesure similaire sera adoptée éventuellement au Parlement d'ici à la fin de l'année et elle entrera en vigueur en début d'année si c'est adopté. Donc, c'est ça qu'on pouvait dire sur la question. Merci.
Yao, et après on aura, we'll have a question for Shaukatali and Shantha.
D'accord.
Yao, you can start.
Oui, je voudrais juste rajouter quelques petits détails et plutôt exprimer mes réserves sur ce qui est en train d'être fait à Lomé, au Togo, mais également au Bénin à côté. C'est les deux pays qui ont introduit cette incitation fiscale dans leur loi, dans leur loi fiscale l'année passée, je pense en 2022. Et comparé à ce qui se fait ailleurs, et notamment en Inde, il s'agit beaucoup plus des politiques de flotte. Des politiques de flotte qui laissent de côté tout le soutien qu'on peut apporter par ailleurs, hein, parce qu'il ne faut pas négliger non plus des politiques de flotte, tout le soutien qu'on peut apporter par ailleurs à des fabricants locaux. Parce que c'est des politiques qui vont favoriser l'importation, mais dans un premier temps au détriment de ce qui peut se faire de façon locale. Alors que nous savons que sur l'axe, sur ce sujet de la mobilité électrique, il y a un paramètre très, très important que des fabricants d'autres régions ne pourraient pas voir forcément à première vue. C'est la question de la tropicalisation des véhicules, donc de leur adaptation aux conditions locales. C'est revenir sur plusieurs paramètres, dont notamment leur capacité à supporter les périodes d'insolation, s'adapter aux variations climatiques. C'est aussi la modularité de ces véhicules, parce qu'en Afrique, les véhicules, vous avez déjà sur le terrain ou à travers les images de voir porter plusieurs personnes et en plus des bagages. Donc, c'est des véhicules qui servent à plusieurs usages. Donc, tropicaliser les véhicules, c'est inclure également tous ces aspects, ce que les fabricants d'autres régions ne pourraient pas forcément intégrer dans leur processus de fabrication. Du coup, pour finir avec cette question, oui à des politiques de flotte, mais il faut également insister sur des politiques qui permettraient à des acteurs, quand je dis acteurs locaux, je ne dis pas forcément des Africains, je dis acteurs qui sont implantés en Afrique, qui apportent une valeur ajoutée aux véhicules électriques en créant de l'emploi, en permettant une montée en compétence de la main-d'œuvre locale, etc., etc. Comme ce qui se fait ailleurs en Inde. Merci.
I have a question in English for Shaukatali. On the trainings that you organize, have you done anything about repairing or recycling batteries specifically?
Oh yeah, 100%. I think all our batteries have been recycled. We actually repurpose lithium-ion batteries from broken electronics, especially laptops and chargers, and we make our own battery packs. In fact, so this will be what has been helping us a lot right now. In fact, we actually in collaboration with a few other countries, like in Uganda and Kenya, to get these batteries repurposed in bulk and brought to us. After which we will then do fine-tune testing to know what is the efficiency of each cell, and put them together to the ones that are mostly highly efficient. So most of the cells that we use for our projects are at least between 95 and 98% efficient, which gives us a lifespan of at least another 3 to 5 years, approximately. But so far, whatever we've done with our recycled batteries have been performing phenomenal right now. So in fact, we're now on the verge of ordering just 30 chassis for electric bikes, and then modifying our own batteries and making our own battery packs for them.
Okay, very interesting. I think we have another question in English for Shantha. They're asking in the chat if there are measures or standards to be respected for e-mobility companies. and about the regulation of the sector, as well as the management and recycling of batteries.
So on the regulatory front, I think there's a lot of activity going on in the continent. I mean, Rwanda was, I think, one of the first countries to adopt and launch their first EV policy. Zimbabwe has one sitting with cabinet, so we're hoping it will be adopted. It's a roadmap. I think that's what's important. You need a policy, but you need a 10-year plan. It's not going to happen overnight. Ghana and Kenya are obviously very, very busy at the moment because they have excess energy as well. So it makes a financial sense. South Africa has a green paper, and there's people writing it. That it's a big question for a country that exports a lot of combustible cars. I think there needs to be more coordination on the regulatory front. I think we need an EV czar for the continent. I think, we've got the African Free Trade Agreement. We've got opportunities not to reinvent the wheel. I think it would help if there was a sort of a bigger strategy which, people could get behind. And I think that's going to take a bit more pushing. In terms of battery recycling, I mean, it's a critical part of the value chain. And I think, there's a lot of even the big companies don't yet have the answers to recycling. I mean, we've seen now, a lot of four-wheel batteries.
On n'a pas compris la traduction en français.
Sorry.
You can keep going, Shantha.
It's also a technology transfer issue because, batteries are complicated boxes, and the chemistry and everything else requires a lot of technology. So I think it's not a simple equation. I think there's a lot of, I've seen it in Zimbabwe. Everyone understands now how a battery can store energy. There's going to be a lot of a big market for cheap imports. There's going to be a lot of crime, I think, around batteries, as we've already seen. So I think the sooner, we figure out how we want to build the African battery sector is going to be valuable, is really, really important. Because it's not a cheap investment either, if we're going to build the skills to do it properly and to scale. Otherwise, we'll have a few of us recycling, and we'll have a lot of cheap, unregulated imports.
Thank you very much, Shantha. Before concluding this eMag, I think I'll be giving back the floor to Dominique. Dominique, si vous voulez conclure ce panel, il y avait aussi une petite question pour vous dans le chat sur les sociétés expérimentées dans le passage de moteurs fossiles au moteur électrique.
Je répondrai en dehors de la... Je vous enverrai des adresses à Chloé, je vous enverrai des adresses et à María. OK. Bon, je crois que c'était very interesting. J'essaie de mélanger les deux. Very interesting information. C'était très intéressant de toutes ces discussions. Je pense qu'il y a beaucoup de questions. I think there's a lot of questions which have no answer, but as Yao said before, comme Yao a dit avant, aujourd'hui, c'est un monde en pleine évolution. That's a there's a lot of evolutions coming. So it's difficult to see exactly what will happen in the next 20 years. Mais je crois qu'il y aura beaucoup de changements, en fait. Et en réalité, il y a, au niveau Afrique, purement Afrique, il y a beaucoup de questions qui se posent en ce moment, beaucoup de pays qui ont envie de passer électrique pour différentes raisons, notamment, et la raison la plus, je dirais, la plus évidente, c'est l'indépendance énergétique. C'est clair. Devant tout le reste, c'est crucial aujourd'hui d'avoir une énergie, d'être energy independent. Et je crois que c'est sur ces sujets-là que, en fait, c'est sur cette base-là, en fait, qu'on va construire des évolutions vers la mobilité électrique, puisque justement, c'est là-bas. Mais on parlait aussi un petit peu d'hydrogène tout à l'heure. Et je crois que dans ce domaine-là, on va effectivement avoir beaucoup d'évolution. Donc, c'était très intéressant, toutes les questions qu'on a vues, toutes les approches qu'on a eues. Et je retiens aussi beaucoup le côté inclusion sociale. So, je pense, I think that the impacts of the social inclusion of the new modes of motorization is very important, and especially in Africa. That's
Merci.
another point which is very important.
Merci beaucoup, Dominique, pour la modération du panel et merci aussi à María pour la présentation et la modération de la première partie. Surtout, merci à tous nos intervenants, à nos partenaires d'Afrique 21. Thank you very much, Shantha and Shaukatali, for your brilliant presentations. Comme Dominique l'a dit, c'était super d'avoir tout le monde aujourd'hui. Pour toutes ces discussions, on a fait finalement que balayer un petit peu le sujet pour apporter quelques réflexions sur la pertinence des mobilités électriques en Afrique. Voilà, donc avant de passer au récapitulatif de nos prochains rendez-vous, on va peut-être essayer, si on y arrive, de prendre une photo de groupe et ensuite je vous donnerai nos prochains événements et on vous laissera parce qu'on est déjà à l'heure de se quitter. Donc, je ne sais pas si on peut nous passer en... Voilà. On va faire un décompte. Donc, OK. N'hésitez pas à allumer vos caméras. C'est le moment. Si vous avez réussi à suivre jusque-là, on pourra aussi continuer les discussions par email. N'hésitez pas à nous contacter. S'il vous reste des questions, vous pourrez aussi réagir à l'eMag Magazine. Si vous avez des questions, on pourra vous mettre en contact avec les intervenants. Ce n'est pas un souci. OK, donc pour la photo, à 3, 1, 2, 3.
Attends, on peut refaire? Je n'étais pas prête.
J'en ai une, mais on peut en faire une deuxième. OK. Prête? 1, 2, 3. Super. Merci beaucoup. Merci encore tout le monde. Et pour votre information, Climate Change sera présent lors de la Medcop les 22 et 23 juin prochains. On a notamment pris part à l'organisation d'un atelier qui portera justement sur les transports, coordonné par UN Habitat et pour lequel on a également collaboré avec CODATU, l'organisation de Dominique, avec laquelle on avait aussi organisé notre précédent sommet Climate Change Afrique à Dakar. Peut-être que certains des participants sont avec nous aujourd'hui. Il m'a semblé en reconnaître quelques-uns. Et le prochain eMag, il aura lieu à la même période que la Medcop, le jeudi 22 juin, et il portera sur la gestion durable des déchets et le rôle des acteurs pour faire émerger des modèles d'économie circulaire en Afrique. Donc, on a commencé un peu à parler de cette question-là en parlant de recyclage, des batteries électriques, etc. Donc, ça sera quelque chose dont on pourra rediscuter la semaine prochaine. On va vous mettre les liens dans le chat. Et un grand merci encore une fois à tout le monde et à la traductrice. Bien sûr, il y a eu une petite mention spéciale dans la discussion. Et merci María pour l'animation de cette eMag, ainsi que Dominique.